Hey folks, my name is Jason. My call sign is KC5HWB, and this is the first or maybe the second, depending on how you look at it, video recording for a series that I'm starting that I'm going to call Ham Radio 2.0, which is to say ham radio, the next step, the updated version. So what I like to focus on, and I'll get more into this as time goes on and in later episodes. I don't want to take up an entire episode or 30 minutes or an hour just kind of talking about me. But what I like to focus on is the newer aspects of amateur radio. That can be digital voice over HF, digital communications such as D-Star, DMR, Fusion. There's a lot more digital formats out there than just those. FM repeaters for 220 megahertz or 900 megahertz, which don't get used nearly as often as 2 meters. So basically what I want to focus on is ham radio for those ham operators that are interested in more than HF and more than 2 meter repeaters. So I'll be focusing a lot on that, and I'll be focusing on new radios that come out, and this will include 2 meters and 440. Anything new that came out, that's coming out, that's about to come out, anything I can get a demo copy of, test radios, prototypes, beta versions, whatever. I know I'm a vendor for some of the Chinese manufacturers and a couple of the U.S. manufacturers. I say U.S. Alinco, Kenwood. These guys are actually made in Japan, but they're the U.S. top dogs. So I'll be demoing new radios. I'll be demoing new equipment, something besides the radio, maybe an antenna, maybe an analyzer, a meter, something like that. I'll be focusing on tech talks done in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I live in Grapevine, Texas, and I own the website at grapevineamateurradio.com, which is It's somebody keying up on 220 right there, 224.92 out of Denton. Turn that down for a minute. So that's a brand new repeater that just went up 2 months ago, maybe. About 2 months ago. This is April. About 2 months ago, and it's got excellent coverage. This is on one of the tallest buildings in one of the colleges in Denton, and 220 megahertz. It covers most of Dallas-Fort Worth, so it's really a good repeater. So I'll be focusing on that kind of stuff and tech talks from amateur radio clubs in the area. I'll include some of that. In fact, we're gonna watch one of those here in a bit that myself and my friend Kent, WA5YXS, he and I did a tech talk on DMR. We presented that to 2 different clubs over the last month. This one that I actually video recorded was for the North Richland Hills Amateur Radio Club. We just did it a couple nights ago, and I video recorded it. I'm gonna play it for you here in a minute. And that's going to be our first official episode. I'm going to call this episode 2 because I actually did a video of how to program your TYT TH9800 quad-band radio several months ago. And I threw that up on YouTube kind of for my customers because I was selling the radio at the time. And it kind of went viral. I think at last count it had just over 10,000 hits, which is not really that much, but I wasn't trying to promote it, and I get calls, emails, texts about that, or emails mostly about that video quite often. People saying, hey, good presentation, what about this? Or I'm having this problem, or something like that. And I'm willing to help anyone. I sell this radio on my website, grapevineamateurradio.com. And, but, you know, if you buy it from someone else, and if you buy it from China, and you have trouble with it, you can call China, and most of the time they'll help you. You can email them if you can understand them. and or you can buy it from a U.S. vendor and get those guys to help you. So I help all my customers, and even those people who aren't my customers, you're welcome to call me if you have any questions about anything. Not on just that video, but on anything else. It's kind of a side tangent, but my point is that I'm getting back to, I'm going to call this episode 2. This is going to be the first in a series. How long the series runs depends on you. How popular it is, how much feedback I get over this venture that I'm starting. And so we're going to call this Ham Radio 2.0, or Live from the Ham Shack, as I like to call it. I got a new Twitter handle, live from the Ham Shack. I think that's what it is. And so we're going to see how this goes. I invite you to come along for the ride. Questions, comments, anything you want to see, any radios you want me to review, feel free to drop me a line. My email address is kc5hwb Kilo Charlie 5 Hotel Whiskey Bravo at grapevinehamradio.com. I own both the URLs, grapevinehamradio.com and grapevineamateurradio.com. You can send it to my call sign in either one. I usually use the Grapevine Ham Radio because I had that URL first. That is my blog. I just do reviews of radios, reviews of ham fests, what's going on in my personal life for amateur radio. I do stuff like that over there. Grapevineamateurradio.com is my sales site. So I have both of those URLs. Those are both me. They're kind of tied together, but they're two separate websites. And so just email me, kc5hwb at grapevinehamradio.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. This should be interesting to see where this goes. Okay, so that's my intro. And lesson learned is not to have the air conditioner running in the background. That's what that noise was. This next clip is myself, Jason, KC5HWB, and my buddy Kent, WA5YXS, giving a presentation to the North Richland Hills Amateur Radio Club on DMR and the comparison of DMR to the other digital formats that are out today, which include D-Star, P25 Phase 1 and Phase 2, Fusion, and NXDN, IDAS, and maybe a couple others I don't remember right now. You're going to hear me talk a lot about DMR because, in my opinion, it is the most reliable, most tested format of digital communication on amateur radio today. I'm not going to get into this right now. I've been using DMR for about 1.5 years, long before Fusion was out. I never have tried D-Star. I want to, but I never have tried it. I do not own a Fusion radio, and I don't own a P25 radio. I don't own any digital radios right now except DMR. So it's the only one I've actually tried. But for reasons that I will share later on in another video series, and reasons that you can see in this coming presentation as well, I believe it is the best digital format in amateur radio today. I'll touch more on that later. You'll hear me do a lot of presentations about DMR, a lot of videos about DMR, because I really like it. I talk on it just about every day. I run a net on Texas Statewide Talk Group number 3148. On Wednesday nights at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I call it the Texas Statewide DMR Net, and everybody, whether you're in Texas or not, some of the other states, I know Oklahoma has some repeaters with the Texas Statewide Talk Group enabled. Anybody can enable any talk group. When I was in Las Vegas this year for the IWCE convention, they had Hawaii statewide, Ohio statewide, Nevada statewide. They had several different statewide groups. So anybody can enable a statewide talk group on their C bridge and talk. You don't have to be in Texas to do it. You can do it from anywhere. It just depends on your C bridge owner and what he wants to allow. So I'm getting off on a tangent. Let me show you this video that Kent and I did, and I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line like always. Thanks.
But between last month and this month, he had sold them. So people wanted it worse than he did, I guess. If anybody wants a demonstration, or if you want to use one of these, or if you want to get on and talking to some of the repeaters or somebody running around in the building, more than welcome afterwards. If you want to come up here and play with them, whatever the case may be, go right ahead. And we'll talk a little bit about those here in just a few seconds. And like I said, the presentation will be available, and all the supporting documentation and things like that. So if anybody has any questions on it or wants it, I can either email it out, however it is. I have a laptop. If you have a memory stick, I can just slot it over there on the laptop after the presentation, and should go pretty smooth. The DMR is digital mobile radio. Been around for quite a few years now, originating in Europe.
You have to hit that button.
Jump.
I ain't about to jump.
Oh, you're ready to turn on.
Now, it's red light, but. And we've been having trouble with it for class. We actually have to push it on.
Here's the power button.
There you go. We got green. It's stinky.
Hear the fan?
Yeehaw.
Should be a bunch of stuff on there. It says DMR Presentation on it. There's programming software.
There we go.
It's there now.
Yeehaw.
There's one of the lights over there.
Just a little bit. Work. Okay. Hey. Yeah, so about me, I'll let Jason do his section.
Good.
I have an extra class license. A lot of what I've enjoyed doing rotates around, revolves around the digital world, digital modes of one type or another, whether it's in broadband hamnet, DMR, digital over HF, some of the, well, just lots of different HF digital modes and things like that. That's kind of where I enjoy it. Is not just your everyday stuff that's out there. It's kind of experimenting with what is there, and a lot of that has revolved around digital modes for me. Jason can kind of do his.
Okay. I've been a ham since '94, pretty much in this area, and got into DMR because of Kent actually about 2 years ago. But I like to use the lesser used bands and lesser used options that amateurs are available to us, but some of us don't use. So there's been a if you ever tried repeater coordination in Dallas Fort Worth, if you ever tried to get a 2 meter or 440 repeater frequency pair, then that's kind of difficult. Well, they've got 900 megahertz frequency pairs. They've got 220 megahertz frequency pairs. Of course, they got 6 meters also. 1.2 probably also. But last year alone, there's about 4 or 5 new 900 repeaters that went up through Dallas Fort Worth. One of those was a DMR repeater. There's DMR on 900 megahertz. And in the last 6 or 7 months, there's been several new 220 repeaters go up also. There's the guys out of Mansfield run a 220 net off of the Fort Worth repeater, 224.78 on Friday nights at 8 p.m. So I think the most check-ins they've had is like 15 people checking into a 220 net. That's pretty good. So we're starting to see a little bit. You get out into the more urban areas and or more rural areas, you don't get as much outside of 2 meters for 40. But around here, you're starting to see a lot more pop up just because there's more hams and more stuff to do and that kind of thing.
Jason does run a Wednesday night net, by the way, on DMR statewide, runs it on the statewide talk group. And so we have people from Lubbock, Amarillo, Houston, Austin, of course around here. You'll get different people in Laredo, wherever, checking in on that, on the statewide net for Texas. It's also hooked up where some people from Oklahoma can chime in. We've never had anybody from Oklahoma. They usually stay on their on the kind of their talk groups rather than talking on the larger talk groups, which we'll talk a little bit about how that works. But anyway, that's a little bit about us. We've been doing DMR for a couple of years now. So what is digital mobile radio? DMR, European Telecommunications Standard Institute, ETSI, first ratified in 2005. It is an open standard. What they did was they had a bunch of people, a bunch of companies came together. They were looking at different types of formats around the world. Here in the United States and in public safety, there's a digital mode called P25, Project 25, APCO Project 25, and by and large, that's what most of your public safety agencies today are using. In Europe, they use kind of a competing standard, if you will, called TETRA, T-E-T-R-A. And TETRA had some good things about it, some not so good things about it. They were looking for something different, and so they decided to look outside of what they had, and they came up with DMR, digital mobile radio. It does meet narrowbanding, 12.5 kilohertz standards. We're going to talk a little bit about this. 2-time slot TDMA. 4-level FSK, C4 FM. So if any of you have heard presentations or read some of the things about Fusion or some of the other standards that are out there, Fusion says C4 FM. That is 4-level FSK. It's the same thing. 4 FSK is the same as C4 FM. It's just they're calling it two different things, but it's like calling it your, hey, I want a pop, hey, I want a Coke. You know, what are you going to call it? I like that cutting edge forward correction. We're going to talk a little bit about that because if you've heard any D-Star or Fusion, that's kind of the terms they use too, is cutting edge forward correction, and there's a reason why that is. Commercial ETSI TIA specs. Whenever ETSI came up with this standard, they were talking about what does the equipment need to meet, what is the base standard for equipment for the modulation and what have you. It was really based on a standard for commercial equipment. So by and large, the equipment that's on there does meet a certain standard for being a little more robust than just your standard amateur equipment that's out there, by and large. And equipment operability is certified by the DMR Association. So anybody can say, hey, I've got a DMR radio and it works. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means. And as long as it meets certain criteria, they don't care how you put it together. They don't care what equipment you use. You can use any program inside of it you want. You can use whatever computer chip you want. Nobody tells you anything. As long as it meets, hey, it can talk to these people. It can talk to all these other radios. It can meet this standard for quality. And it has, you know, these things. They have a list of mandatory things that, hey, you can get qualified and certified by the DMR Association. They don't tell you what you can or can't use for equipment. If you want to build your own, knock yourself out. You can even get it certified. Okay.
He said earlier that some of you have DMR. Does anybody use DMR in here? Has anybody ever used it before? You've used it before. One? Okay.
Okay.
All right. More than we had in our last one.
Pardon me?
That's more than we had in our last presentation.
Yeah. That's why we have 35 or 40 people in here.
Yeah.
So just as a basic comparison, DMR versus other digital standards, digital modes. By the way, this isn't here to sell any particular brand of equipment, type of equipment, a certain standard. We're going to talk about the goods and the bads of each of the different standards, including DMR. DMR has some bad, chinks in its armor, just like everybody else does. And by and large, we know as hams, some people like D-Star, some people like Fusion, some people like some crazy 2.4 analog, and they have the only repeater in the world that works it. Man, that's what's great about amateur radio. So, but we're going to talk about what's good and bad in all of them. DMR, by the way, we're going to toss these around a little bit. TDMA and FDMA, what these are older cell phone standards, okay? It's the technology that's used in order to transmit digital data over RF. And basically it's how the little zeros and ones get turned on and turned off, and how that they're received and decoded and encoded on the opposite end to come back the other direction. They're two different methodologies of how you get there, how it's decoded and encoded. But TDMA and FDMA, as well as the D-Star GMSK, which if anybody knows GSM cell phones used to be the technology like on AT&T, T-Mobile, all those things. GMSK, GSM, that's right. D-Star is based on the GSM cell phone standard. The Fusion is based on the FDMA cell phone standard, and DMR is based on the TDMA cell phone standard. Okay, they use the same basic waveforms, if you will. So DMR is TDMA with C4FM and an AMBE plus 2 codec or vocoder. Everybody saying, what the heck is that? You want to take that one? No?
No.
Okay. All right. When digital modes first came out in the United States with P25, the old stuff, they use all a vocoder is how do I encode the data to make it digital? So I'm taking something that's being fed into a microphone, making it into zeros and ones. How do I compress that and put it in a form I can send it over RF? And then I need something on the other end that receives it, builds it back into voice, and spits it out over a speaker, right? So that we can understand it. IMBE was the first version of that in 1989 is when they first came up with it, okay? Worked pretty good, but everybody sounded like they were R2-D2 talking into a tin can. A lot of times in noisy environments it was very difficult, and you got a lot of, everybody has probably a digital TV now instead of an analog TV, so everybody knows when you lose a little bit of the signal, what happens? You start getting blocks and pixelated picture. Well, imagine a pixelation over the speaker. You hear, something like that going on out of your speaker. Then they came up with the next version, which was AMBE, was an improvement, and then AMBE Plus, and they got a little bit better. Then now they've got AMBE Plus 2, and they've got a couple of different renditions of that, but they still call it Plus 2, and that's the latest computer program, basically, for putting things together and taking them apart in the digital world over the air. Okay, it's the latest technology involved in it. Fusion uses FDMA, C4FM, and it also uses an AMBE plus 2 vocoder. Okay. D-Star uses AMBE, not plus or plus 2, so it does use an older vocoder. So some people say they can tell the difference. It takes a pretty sharp ear, but a lot of times the voice quality, especially out on the fringes, isn't quite as sharp. It doesn't quite build it back as well into a natural voice over the speaker. Okay? And it uses GMSK modulation, which is very similar to the GSM cell phones that have been out there for 15, 20 years. P25, this was the original here, when they came out in 89, 90, uses FDMA, very similar to Fusion. Okay? And it uses an IMBE vocoder, which was the original that was out there. And then later renditions that we're just getting out now, I know everybody's going, man, this is boring and everything else. This is kind of important because one of the things it does is if you look like Fusion and almost a 30-year-old standard here for P25 Phase 1 are actually very similar to one another in how they're built and what they do. The P25 Phase 2 is very similar to what DMR is currently, and D-Star that on their own. Nobody does it like them. I mean, it really is. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just they just decided to do it different than everybody else. There's some other standards out there down in Austin. In Austin, they have the NXDN and IDAS. I think so.
NXDN.
The NXDN. Yeah, they've got a repeater system down there, linked repeaters using another standard called NXDN.
That's Kenwood's Next Edge. You ever heard of Kenwood's Next Edge? It's popular over in Europe. That's their digital that Kenwood came up with. They don't use it much here for amateur stuff.
So now, just some real big basics about, okay, so I've heard TDMA, and I've heard FDMA, and I've heard C4FM, and what does that mean to me in practical terms? Okay, the biggest advantage that TDMA, which is DMR, has over most of the other standards is that you get 2 repeaters in one box. They have 2 time slots. You can have 2 conversations going on at the same time on the same repeater and they don't hear each other. Okay? You can have one on time slot 1 and one on time slot 2. Or you can dedicate time slot 2 to passing GPS or data if you want off a computer, and have time slot 1 for voice, or however it is. You can have 2 streams of communication going back and forth at exactly the same time, and they never know each other are there. You never hear them. Okay? An FDMA system, or something like the D-Star system, in order to get that, you physically have to have 2 repeaters. They have to go into combining equipment. They have to go into, and well, depending on how your repeater's set up. Anyway, you have to go into some kind of combining equipment, but you physically have to have 2 repeaters. An FDMA repeater system, what it does is it splits everything on frequency. A TDMA splits it on time, and so what it'll do is it'll cram 0s and 1s in between the spaces in between where it's transmitting data. Because remember, all we're doing is we're moving digital data, and so it says, hey, I'm going to transmit a little bit, and then I got a space. Well, what am I going to do with that space? Well, hey, I can transmit a little bit more on the next time slot. And so on the next space, it transmits, and so what it does is it lines them up, lines up your blocks. So you can have 2 conversations going on at the same time. That's the best part about TDMA over some of the other standards, which is why P25 Phase 2, the latest one, uses TDMA standard. It's very, very spectrum efficient. Yeah, we don't really have to talk about this. Doesn't really affect a lot of things. One of the big things about digital is you can cram a lot more stuff in there. If you have a 25 kilohertz wide signal, and everybody everybody probably knows about narrowbanding in the public world, public sector world. Most everybody had to narrowband their radios, put them down to 12.5. Well, you can then cram twice as many frequency pairs into a given amount of space, which is why you narrowband. And the nice thing about digital is it allows you to do that. And there's even some standards now that are coming out that are in the 6.25. So now instead of just twice as many frequency pairs, now you can fit 4 times as many frequency pairs. Like, we need more repeaters in the amateur world, but anyway, it's if you want a pair, it's pretty important. This one's yours.
All right, so if you, everybody knows what happens when you get far away from an analog repeater. You start to hear a lot more noise in the background, a lot more static, maybe just sometimes the noise even covers up the voice signal. With the DMR, it's basically off or on, but what that means is the forward error correction that Kent had mentioned earlier is that once you get to a certain point, if you're here on analog, if your repeater's here and you're here on analog, you're going to be statically into the repeater and you're going to be readable, but if you're here on digital, you're still going to sound like you're standing right next to the repeater. And once it gets to a certain point, you would lose the repeater on analog, you're going to lose the repeater on digital also. But to that point, it is crystal clear, just the same way it is if you were standing right next to under the repeater. That's the theory behind it. Now, you got to take into account environment, how many buildings are between, what's your elevation, all that kind of good stuff. Just like, it's RF, just like everything else is. But it's got a better forward error correction than, anybody ever talk on D-Star? Anybody ever use D-Star? One DMR, no D-Star. You use D-Star, okay.
Yeah, I have a bunch of D-Star stuff.
Okay, so the R2D2 sound. Are you familiar with that?
No, never
Okay.
heard that.
Okay.
I know
I've never used D-Star, but I know guys on D-Star and they say, oh yeah, sometimes it can get an R2D2 sound. That's what, when they get far enough away from it, that's what it sounds like, supposedly. That's what I'm told. DMR, you don't have that problem. That's basically the difference.
That was pretty nice. We were talking simplex on UHF coming over here, and he was, what do you go, 121, 820?
Yeah.
Around that way?
Yeah.
And I come through, I live down mid-cities here, so I was coming down mid-cities, and we were talking simplex, and there's no pops, no hisses, no whistles, no fades, no nothing. It's dead on, crystal clear. Whether he was sitting in the room or sitting 5 miles away, it didn't matter. Everything was perfectly clear on simplex without even having to work through a repeater. And he was coming around 120, and I was right down here by Birdsville or whatever. So anyway, it's pretty neat. It really is. DMR does offer a longer battery life than than most standards. That includes FDMA. I've heard some people that are using different, even older P25 radios. That's one of the big deals is that it can really chew up some battery, and especially like you have one, and you say you left on your GPS or something? Or?
That was my Fusion radio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Left the GPS on. It killed it in like 4 hours.
Yeah. It'll
built-in
drain you
radar.
quick. This was kind of interesting. I've actually got the supporting documentation on this from when Fusion was being built. Vertex Standard owned the company, and then Vertex Standard is now owned by Motorola. But I have the original document on that, and the engineers even said at the time that TDMA was going to offer a much longer battery life than what FDMA was, but they decided, there was some other reasons behind it, they decided to use the FDMA. But a D-Star radio, or we're going to talk about the different tiers of what that means, but anyway, the DMR TDMA standard, or any TDMA standard like P25, the newest rendition, offers a much longer battery life. And the reason why is because your transmitter is only on half as much. Unless you have data streams going out on one side and voice on the other, that means one data stream is turned off. So in theory, your transmitter is only on half as much than it is on even analog. Analog is on all the time when you have a key down. You don't see it, but when you're on TDMA and you have it keyed up, it's only transmitting half of the time while you have it keyed down. Sounds weird to hear that, but that's the way it works. You're only talking on one type slot at a time. This is what I was talking about. On slot 1 could be voice, slot 2 could be GPS or location. This is kind of neat. IP Site Connect is roaming. This is, we're going to talk a little bit about it. Has anybody heard, instead of DMR, they call it motor turbo? Motor turbo. Okay. All motor turbo is, that's what Motorola decided to call their version of DMR. Okay? So basically, somebody came up with this table and says, this is a table. And they said, nope, that's a mesa. We're not going to call it a table anymore. That's all they did. They named it something else. Came up with their own little things that they wanted to do with it, added in a few things from some third-party vendors, but as long as it met the base standard, it was DMR certified, and then they could put other stuff in if they wanted to. But Motor Turbo, all it is Motorola's flavor of DMR. One of the things Motorola did right was they came up with this really neat roaming feature. And do you know if Hytera has that? Do you know I don't know if they have roaming. I think Motorola is still the only one that has it.
I believe that's correct. Yep.
So what you can do is, like I've got a mobile over here, and I've got a bunch of talk groups from different repeaters. I got Denton, I got Anna, Texas, I've got Fort Worth, Dallas, New Arlington. Anyway, several different of them in there. Then I'm driving around town, and like on the way over here, you look down, and what it does is it polls the repeaters, and it says, hey, which one of you guys are going to give me the best signal? And it says, that one is. And so your radio automatically flips over to that, almost like trunking, and goes to that radio. And I was sitting there talking right in the middle, and I looked down, and it flipped over to Fort Worth, and you don't ever see it. It's right in the middle of your QSO. It'll flip repeaters, and you never even know it happens. And so especially if you're in a mobile and it's really far flung, but if you're on an HT or something like that, you may not know that one may be 5% better than this one, which may be some pixelation here, but not there. Really cool. You don't have to figure it out. You just put it on the top group you want. If you have it in roaming, it figures it out for you and goes to that repeater automatically. So, kind of a neat feature. And you just program in whatever repeaters you want in that roaming category. So that's.
You're going to keep talking to the same people. I mean, it's not going to change your frequency.
It changes your frequency, but you're still talking to the same people.
All right. That's
Yep. You never miss a beat. It stays with your QSO. It just changes tower, just like a cell phone tower. It just rolls over to the next tower where and it moves the conversation over there for you. But you don't ever hear it. You don't ever see it. It's kind of cool. You look down and all of a sudden you'll be talking and your screen will change, or somebody will be talking to you and your screen will change. You'll be on a different repeater. Pretty neat. You can run a repeater in mixed mode. You can go in on analog, out on analog, in on digital, out on digital. That is if you have a standalone repeater, or if you're on a
Hytera network.
Yeah, Hytera network will allow it. Around here, most of the repeaters are on the DMR MARC network, and they have decided not to allow analog on their system. They wanted to keep it all digital. That's their deal. Whatever. You know, I mean, who am I to argue? I guess I didn't spend the $150,000 to come up with the initial hardware, so it wasn't my choice. But anyway, they got some funny rules about that. You can send text messages over the system.
That's because of motor turbo.
Yeah, yeah.
Their repeater won't network without you spending a lot more money.
Yeah, they have solutions for that now. There's a couple of companies that offer some really neat solutions to fix that problem. Filed Micro is one of them, FYLDE, and they've got a really neat one. And you can plug whatever repeaters you want into it. Like say, hey, you got a Fusion repeater and you got a DMR repeater, and you want to hook them together. You can plug them both into this box, and what you do is on a Fusion repeater, you log in via your call sign. On a DMR repeater, you have to have a 7-digit number that they assign to you. Well, you put in everybody's call signs as aliases, and you associate them with that 7-digit number. So when I key up on my DMR radio, it automatically converts that into my call sign, so it'll log me into the Fusion repeater automatically as well. You can hook it to whatever system you want, P25, Fusion, D-Star. It'll carry it over to whatever. Even if it's like and they got some weird ones, MPT 1237, 1327, whatever it is. It's an analog with digital technology. Anyway, pretty weird.
There's a new thing that I learned about today. Actually, I learned what it was today. I'd heard of it before. DMR Plus. There's a company that's come out with a thing called DMR Plus, and since the DMR repeater has 2 time slots, it's essentially 2 repeaters in one, like Kent just said. So what you can do is you can take it and plug it into this DMR Plus box, and this one time slot on your DMR repeater can join this network, can join DMR Mark, and then the other time slot can join the Hytera network, or another network that you've set up. So you've essentially got 2 DMR repeaters on 2 totally separate networks in the same location that you can talk to with the same radio. You just flip your talk groups over. You can talk to these guys over here or these guys over here. So really, there's a lot of people doing stuff with DMR because it's such a worldwide standard. A lot of there's a lot more to it than just Motorola, no matter what Motorola tells you.
Motorola didn't do a lot of favors for the ham side of it anyway.
Yeah.
They did a huge favor for the DMR standard as a whole and proliferating it, but for the hams, it's kind of constraining sometimes. There's over 400 repeaters around the world, 38 countries. The DMR MARC network is 100% pure digital. As of this morning, there was 11,600 users. I thought that was pretty interesting. In 24 months, they've grown by 9,000 users. 2 months ago when I looked, it was like 10,200 users. So really, in about 90 days, they've added, they've grown by 1,400 users in about 90 days, which is pretty impressive. They're growing at a pretty good clip right now. There's their website if you want to check them out. This is probably one of the biggest selling points of DMR right here. Some current manufacturers of equipment. A lot of these, most of us hams don't deal with. And he's actually the equipment expert. Yeah. So if you want to talk about some of the manufacturers and stuff.
There's a lot of them. I went to IWCE in March, I think it was. Everybody know what that is? In Las Vegas, International Wireless Communications Expo. They hold it every year. It's basically a big public safety, commercial communications, everything there. And they had DMR and P25 everywhere. And there was no D-Star there. Yaesu didn't show up, which really kind of surprised me. Icom was there, Alinco was there, Kenwood was there, Motorola had a huge display. But a lot of these companies you see right here, you probably you recognize Kenwood.
Yeah.
And did you do that? Okay. So Kenwood's got DMR radios. They don't sell them in the States. They sell them overseas.
Yep.
You probably recognize, some of you may recognize RCA Connect Systems. That's a big one. There's a guy out in California building radios for the commercial market for a number of years. He's building DMR radios specifically for amateur radio operators in the United States right now. Pretty much the only guy doing it specifically for amateur radio operators. But ICOM will make, tell them your ICOM. I don't remember the story on ICOM.
ICOM is actually a member of the DMR Association. It's kind of funny, they build the hardware that you can actually use on the DMR network. They run a computer program that makes it NextEdge or IDAS. They sell that same stuff to Kenwood and Kenwood programs it as a DMR radio. It's funny, that's something else we're going to cover in a little bit, but ICOM currently doesn't want to produce a DMR radio unless they really had to, but they already have their own standards. You know, they've got their own thing going on, and they don't want to build something for the competition at this point. But like one of them said, well, you got to join so that, you know, you can keep up with your competition. Well, I guess so, but it's pretty funny because they build the hardware for it. So, go figure.
So,
Yeah, there's a, right now, that I found, what was it, 36?
36.
Yeah, there's no less than 36 manufacturers worldwide of DMR equipment. That's a lot. That's a lot of, you know, when you look at, you know, you get pretty limited in D-Star, you get pretty limited even in P25 unless you get really expensive stuff. Fusion is one manufacturer at this point, and DMR is no less than 36 manufacturers of equipment right now.
a lot of variety.
Yeah, I mean, there's some big ones that, this is the one that really shocked me, that down here, this General Dynamics. General Dynamics has now built a DMR system specifically for airborne and shipborne communications, and it's the first time in U.S. history that they have standardized a digital mode of operation for use on board ships and aircraft for communications. And they selected it over P25 because they have the ability to make it so secure. They can do things with it. It's much more open standard than P25 and some of the other ones that claim to be open standard. And so the military has chosen DMR over all other standards for digital communications for airborne and shipborne communications. So pretty interesting.
If you've been to the airport lately, you go park in the remote parking or the express parking. You take the shuttle to the terminal. If you listen to the radio, I just found this out like a month ago. Listen to the radio they're talking on the airport shuttle. That's DMR. They're all talking on DMR commercial frequencies.
Talk groups are like chat rooms. All they are is it's just a room with a number. Like if you have Fusion or something like that, all it does is you say, hey, if I type that group is 302. If I type in 302 and key up the radio, everybody else who has 302 programmed in and listening or scanning or whatever on it, they hear me. That's all it means. It's just different talk groups on the repeater. I was telling the guys and ladies down in Mansfield, that's one of the interesting things about DMR is that if a club has one, say you have a races group, and you decided, hey, I'm going to run time slot 1 is going to have a couple of talk groups on it, and we're going to use that for local and statewide communications. And then instead on time slot 2, which would normally be, say, worldwide or something, I'm going to take that and I'm going to use that for races only. And so, or official club activities, or public service events, or whatever you wanted to make it for, anything that's official club related business or stuff that you're supporting. Works out really well for that because people on time slot 1, they can keep on keeping on. Man, I'm talking about drive time and traffic and it's raining and you wouldn't believe cats and dogs. And on the other side of that, there's somebody talking about, hey, at rest stop 1, we need ice. Hey, we need to get somebody out of the way because we got lightning. Hey, we got a problem out here at Texas Motor Speedway, and they never hear each other. And you're having 2 conversations at the same time on the same repeater. Works out really nice so that you end up with 2 repeaters for the cost of 1. That's one of that's a real world scenario of why DMR is very effective, especially in a club configuration. You know more about the talk groups than I do. If you want to tell them about some of the neat ones or fun ones, or they got all kinds of them.
Yeah, most of your states will have. There's a Texas statewide, Oklahoma statewide, Arkansas statewide. All the states that have DMR, which is not all the states yet. There's like what 30 states that have DMR, something like that. So every state has a talk group. They have regional talk groups that kind of split the continental U.S. into like 5 different regions. So you can key up and talk to all the states in the region. They have a nationwide talk group, or they call it North America actually, because there's several Canadian stations in there. You can get on North America and talk to a guy in New York, a guy in Ottawa, Canada, a guy in California, whatever. And
I guess Spanish speaking only.
Yeah,
They got
yeah.
some Portuguese sites.
Yeah.
If you speak Portuguese, knock yourself out.
yeah, so all kinds of, I mean, pretty much something for everything. There's so many different
Yeah,
talk groups out there.
they got all kinds of talk groups. You can program in what you want, what you don't want. When somebody keys up, that's the other thing. You don't kerchunk a DMR repeater because when you kerchunk it, everybody knows exactly who did it. Everybody knows who did it. Your number shows up. Yeah, and so you don't. And there's some really neat features. talking to a guy out of Mesquite one day, and a buddy of his down at Bryan College Station, they got a repeater down there, was sitting on his microphone. How often does that happen? And he goes, man, that guy will not get off his microphone. Hang on a second. He gets on his HT and goes, tick, tick, click, clicks over and says, unkey. Unkeys his radio, just like that. Sends him a text message. You're sitting on your microphone. Guy comes back, oh, sorry about that. Didn't notice that. Not recommended that you unkey somebody's radio unless it's a legitimate purpose. That'd probably get you in some trouble with the FCC, but hey, if you want to do it, fine. If you want to know if your buddy or wife or whatever is within radio range, you can go down your screen and say, hey, is their radio online right now? Yes, it is. Your radio will say whether their radio is connected to the repeater or not. And it does all kinds of neat stuff. Something else that came up, and I didn't realize this until after the last presentation, there was a gripe because they said, well, you can't do something D-Star does, which is, if I hop off a plane in Atlanta, I can't call Joe and say, hey Joe, I'm here, and not have the entire world hear me. Yes, you can. There is private call one-to-one. On the DMR MARC network, they do frown against it. The reason why is it ties up a talk group, potentially a North American talk group, for a one-to-one conversation. But when you log in with Joe, nobody can hear your conversation. They can't break in, they can't monitor it. It's a two-way link that nobody else gets to hear anywhere. Doesn't even matter if you have the talk group programmed up. So they do frown against it. Hytera network does allow it. Some of the other networks do allow one-on-one. DMR MARC asks that you don't. You can do it on the statewide and on the local talk groups. It's up to the repeater trustees whether they want to allow it on their individual repeaters. But on the nationwide stuff, they do frown upon it. They ask that you don't do it anyway. So, 7 digits, voice ID. If anybody is a computer programmer, if you like RF, if you're an experimenter and you do want to be involved, they have a ton of projects going on in the DMR world, just like they do in D-Star and all the other things. I put 3 new slides in there. I hadn't shown you this, but he can cover kind of what Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 are.
Tier 1 is based, there's a standard, DMR Tier 1, DMR Tier 2, and DMR Tier 3. There's a standard over in the UK called DPMR, which is basically DMR Tier 1. Over there they use it like FRS. It's their FRS, except it's digital. They don't have repeater. I think they may have repeaters.
They do now, yeah.
But it's called DPMR. You can get on there. Anybody can go to Walmart, buy a radio, and get on DPMR and talk to one another, just like you can FRS here, except it's digital instead of analog. That's DMR Tier 1. DMR Tier 2 is what we use. It's licensed features with all the things that we've just been talking about. DMR Tier 3, the only difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 is that Tier 3 incorporates trunking. So we don't, as amateurs, we don't use trunking, but the airports can use it, the taxi cab companies, they can all use it, so all these other people who are using it commercially can use trunking.
Yeah, it's funny because Motorola is actually not a Tier 3 vendor. They don't offer Tier 3 natively in their products, but lots of manufacturers around the world do. If you want Tier 3 trunking from Motorola, you have to go to a third-party vendor and have them incorporate a new board, an option board inside the radio and buy extra stuff. So it was kind of funny that Motorola, that was one of the big proliferators, didn't even have all of the standards, but they never wanted to really get involved. You can see there's some things on here. If anybody wants this presentation, it's a lot to cover, but like on Tier 3, here's the stuff that you have to have on Tier 3 to qualify as a Tier 3 radio. That's the optional stuff you can have down there. You don't have to have it, but they recommended that you have it. So, like we were talking about earlier, if you want to have a Tier 2 radio and have your Tier 2 certification through DMR, as long as it does, those things. It has group call, individual call. We talked about the individual call. It has an all call feature. And this is from an operational standpoint. As long as it has that, man, it's a Tier 2 radio. If it has this other stuff, radio check, like I said, if you want to budget friend and see if they have the radio on, if it, remote disable, enable, remote monitor, that's kind of a cool one. If you have it, you can sit there and listen in on your buddy, and hey, what are you doing? They can't hear you, they don't know that you're listening in. Emergency alarm, emergency call. Remember, this is primarily a commercial system, so a lot of these things are based on commercial needs. Anyway, if you do enable them, just be aware of what you're enabling in the software. We won't talk a lot about this, but This is Moto Turbo stuff that they came up with. They came up with the IP Site Connect, that's the roaming we talked about. Some of the privacy things that they have. They call it Moto Turbo trunking, which is Capacity Plus or Connect Plus. You have to get a third-party board, it's not native. These are just some of the things that they run, like you can run a computer program and it'll tell you who's the last heard, where were they, all that. Here's a big one. So I call this plus delta. Delta being chain, things that, the good and the bad. DMR advantages, proliferation of equipment, 36 different manufacturers, overall equipment price. What are some of the lesser, like HTs running now?
Oh, you can get the Connect systems or the Anytone HT for $199.
Okay, $199.
You can get, and then that's with the display. You can get some models that are only 32 channels with no display for about 150.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. By the way, most of the radios, another question comes up, can they do analog and digital? Yes, they can do both. So you can put analog repeaters in as well as digital repeaters. And by and large, most of them are not dual band. That is a disadvantage. Connect Systems working on one.
Yeah, vaporware.
There's been some rumblings.
BFDX is going to be, BFDX will probably have them before they do, I'm betting. One good thing about everybody else out there except, well, maybe not everybody, pretty much everybody except Motorola. Hytera, I think you got to pay for their software, don't you? Pretty much everybody overseas who makes DMR radios gives you free software. Motorola charges $350 a year on a subscription for their programming software, something like that. And yeah, they're commercial vendors. So now there's a lot of hams who are Motorola, who have Motorola accounts who will, if you buy a Motorola radio and you get on the network and say, hey, I need someone to program my radio, there are hams who will do it for you. Kent has a Motorola online account, you know, so, and you can get it done. But most of the other vendors will give you software. Buy my radio, you get free software. That's one thing that some people, I've heard people say before, I don't want to get in DMR because I don't want to pay for Motorola software. You don't have to. You can get 35 other manufacturers, and most of the time their software is free.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I got it. When I got my first radio, I didn't have any Motorola software, so one of the repeater trustees has a Motorola account, owns a repeater, has all the stuff. He said, man, show up over here and I'll program the radio for you. So he did it for me. So there's a bunch of hams that do that. A lot of us are glad to do it. DMR disadvantages. Many of the link systems, they limit the features used. Like the Mark network doesn't want analog. They don't want you to do one-on-one on nationwide. But that's their system rule, not because of the standard. Most systems don't allow private calls. Sometimes they're not real ham friendly on that. Anyway, FPP equipment. Even when who's coming out with the FPP?
Connect Systems.
Okay, so they're probably going to have an FPP-enabled radio here pretty quick. Software for commercial transceivers can be expensive, like Motorola, Hytera. Most of the overseas ones, though, you get for free.
What's FPP?
Yep.
Front panel programmable. In other words, you can
That means you can program in your own frequency without using software or computer.
I probably should have known, but I didn't.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
There is a way to do a Motorola radio. Once again, you can put a special board in it. They can convert it, and it's like $250. You can already take an expensive radio, chunk in $300 in software, another $250 board. We can make it mostly FPP. Yeah, go with that. Might want to consider some of the other options. There's some better options out there, unless you just run across a screaming deal. Or if you have a rich uncle. Either way. Fusion, advantages, inexpensive repeaters, ham-friendly equipment, lots of features such as APRS, the wires 2 linking, I guess it'll come out here pretty quick. Does have excellent audio. Has some disadvantages right now. The equipment tends to be expensive because there's one manufacturer. Unless you find a pretty good deal on it, it can be pretty expensive. They have had some glitches. I think they're working out most of those in software. Wires 2, is it online yet? Does anybody know? Okay.
In fact, I think they delayed it.
It is.
I heard that Butch said they delayed it.
Yeah. It is extremely expensive to duplicate the DMR2's time slot system because it does take 2 individual repeaters to do that on a Fusion system. And it's extremely wide band compared to other digital standards for the same amount of traffic. So on a DMR, 12.5 kilohertz, you can get 2 conversations in there. On something like Well, D-Star will do it because it's 6.25 kilohertz wide, so technically you can run two D-Star repeaters and get it to 12.5, but you got to have a guard band between them, so technically you would still be 22.5 kilohertz wide. You'd be pretty wide even for a narrow band signal. And Fusion will take two repeaters running 12.5 wide each to do it, so you'd still have a 25 kilohertz wide signal. It's a lot of information right there. But anyway, it's difficult to do with Fusion. D-Star, very established systems, multiple bands, VHF, UHF, HF, 220. Hey, they have 220 DPMR, tier 1 now. You can do tier 1 DMR on 220 now. So, very established systems, lots of hand-friendly equipment, lots of features, lots of development. Anybody ever heard of a DB Mega or? Okay. Make these really neat things for D-Star. I love them. You can take this little box, has a little antenna on it, you plug it into the internet, you program the little box up, and then you can walk around your house with your HT, and it acts like a repeater in your house. So it's a hot spot for your house, so that if you can't get into your repeater out because you live somewhere, well now you can even run an external antenna while you're running around the farm on your tractor or whatever, and talk into your own repeater right there at your house with a little box. Runs off like a Raspberry Pi. Pretty neat. A company called DB Mega that makes those. They just built one for DMR also, and they just released them for the market. So you can have your own DMR hotspot or your own D-Star hotspot. Pretty neat technology. They're like $189, $190. I mean, it's expensive, but it's not over the top or anything, especially if you live pretty remote. One equipment manufacturer, basically. Expensive end user equipment, can be unless you buy it, used. And it's very expensive to duplicate a two-time slot system. P25, we're really not going to spend. There are some P25 repeaters around here. There's a 900 P25 repeater, Denton. UHF P25 in Carrollton. Has a real nice footprint on it. So there are some P25 repeaters around.
Ham radio repeaters he needs.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
There's a lot of P25. All the cities around here have gone to P25. Fort Worth, Tarrant County, everybody's on P25. There's some ham radio stuff too.
Yeah, talk about an anomaly. Get on the 900 P25 system. There's like 4 of us. That's it. A couple of ham-friendly dealers. Rayfield Communications is a big one. They build some of the bridging equipment as well as some other stuff. Sandy's Communications, they're a Motorola dealer, but they're a ham-friendly Motorola dealer, and they really do give you a really good price. DFW Communications is done really good by me here lately, especially like on NMO mounts and some other things. They've got some guys over there now and girls that are very ham-friendly, so I can say I've had some good positive experiences. Grapevine Amateur Radio website is a local vendor that does carry a lot of DMR. I don't think HRO here is carrying DMR equipment right now, not that I'm aware
I think
of.
that somebody said they had a Vertex out there, but I don't know. I think Rod said they had a Vertex DMR radio.
Yeah, maybe then. eBay, local dealer, there's some options there. Last but not least, this is kind of interesting. Everybody says, so what's really the difference? Okay, if you take a Fusion radio and you take it apart, and you take a DMR radio and you take it apart, and you take a D-Star radio and take it apart, they all got the same chip inside. It's the same stuff inside of every one of them. There's only 3 manufacturers in the world of vocoder chips, and the standard chip for P25 and every one of them is by a company called DVSI, Digital Voice Systems Incorporated, and they use the DVSI 3000 model chip as the standard chip across all standards. Now, the other 2 vocoder manufacturers, I need to verify this, but this is what I've been told. If anybody's heard one of the Connect Systems DMR radio, it doesn't sound bad or anything. It just sounds a little different than like a Motorola, and I'm told the reason why is their initial radio used a different vocoder chip, so it sounded just a little bit different. What's the model on the radio that's supposed to come out with it? There's a new
CS750.
Yeah.
Should be out in a couple of weeks, and it's supposed to use the new DVSI chip.
So there you go. But so basically if you did this, I don't know how much y'all know about computers. If you had a computer, the computer is just a piece of hardware. All it does is what the software tells it to do. Well, that piece of hardware is the same whether you have a Fusion radio, a DMR radio, a P25 radio, a D-Star radio, I don't care what it is, that chip inside is all the same. The only thing different inside of them is the software that makes them run. The manufacturers do that so that they protect their pocketbook because they don't want theirs to be compatible with other people's So you can't take your Kenwood and go get on their ICOM system unless somebody pays a licensing fee or something, right? It's royalty, money. So that's a big one, is it's all the same stuff inside, basically. That little chip is what matters. They're all running basically the same equipment. Acknowledgements, a lot of people help put this together. That's it. Anybody have any particular questions? Anybody need an app? Yes, Mr. Stewart.
How much does all this cost?
You know, you'd be surprised. I bought a 900 megahertz DMR radio. Man, there was a bunch of us that bought them.
Yeah, that guy on Bat Labs.
Yeah, Bat Labs.
You sell them for
Bat Labs was selling equipment, 99 bucks a piece, or yeah, 99 bucks a piece for a Motorola DMR.
The Connect Systems is the one that most people have heard of,
Yeah.
and the one that most people buy because he's a ham operator, and that's probably what you have. Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Those things are $199.
How much are those like the DFDX mobile and the
$250.
about $250?
Or no, the mobile is about $300.
Yeah, brand.
Yeah.
For a brand new one. This is a Hytera. This is analog and digital. It runs about 150, 155 bucks. Works amazingly well. You'd be real surprised on how well that little bugger works. The thing I like about this one is it uses the same charger as my cell phone, so I can plug it in my car and it charges up. Doesn't take a charger stand or anything.
Say that's both analog and digital, they don't all do that?
Yeah, they all
these
do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Motorola does build a radio about this size called an SL7550, and it's digital only. Motorola does build one that's